The invitation came on a Tuesday, which should have told me something. My son never called on Tuesdays. He saved his calls for Sundays, the kind that lasted 4 minutes and ended with him saying he had to get the kids ready for something, though the something always changed and I stopped trying to keep track of what it was. But that Tuesday in October, he called twice before noon, and the second time, I picked up. He said he wanted to bring the family over for dinner on Saturday. He said the kids missed me. He said my daughter-in-law had been asking about my pot roast recipe, the one my mother taught me in her kitchen, in a house that no longer stands, in a neighborhood that no longer looks the way it did when I was a girl pressing my nose against the window, watching snow fall on the maple tree out front. I said, of course. I said I would make the pot roast and the biscuits and the apple cake my grandson had liked so much at Easter. I said I was looking forward to it. I hung up the phone and stood in my kitchen for a moment, with my hand still resting on the counter. Outside, the oak tree in my backyard had gone gold overnight, the way it always does when October finally decides to mean it. I have lived in this house for 31 years. My late husband and I bought it the spring after our youngest started walking, when we decided we were done moving and ready to grow roots somewhere real. We painted every room ourselves. We argued about the color of the hallway for 3 weeks and finally agreed on a warm cream that my son, as a teenager, called boring and that I still think is the most beautiful color in the world for a hallway. My husband passed 4 years ago last February. After the funeral, after the casseroles stopped coming and the neighbors stopped checking in and the world resumed its ordinary turning, I was left alone in this house with 31 years of living pressed into its walls, and I decided that was enough, that the house itself was enough, that I was enough. I believed that for a while. I spent most of Friday in the kitchen. I took the roast out of the freezer the night before and set it on the counter by morning the way my mother always said to. I made the biscuit dough from scratch, the way that takes time, but tastes like something, and I pressed the apples for the cake myself rather than using the jarred filling my daughter-in-law had once suggested would save me the trouble. Saving trouble was never the point. The point was the doing of it. The hour of standing at the counter with flour on my hands and the radio playing something low in the background and the house smelling like a home. By 5 o'clock on Saturday, the table was set with the good dishes. I had ironed the tablecloth my mother-in-law gave me as a wedding gift, the ivory one with the small embroidered border that she had done by hand. I put flowers in the center from the last of what was still blooming in the side garden. I had not put flowers on the table since my husband died, not because I forgot, but because I kept thinking it would feel too formal for just myself, too much like a performance no one was there to watch. That evening, as I set the flowers in their place, I thought about how much he would have enjoyed this. The pot roast, the company, the gold tree visible through the dining room window catching the last of the afternoon light. He was a man who believed in setting a proper table. He used to say that how you treat a meal is how you treat the people you share it with. My son arrived at 6:30 with my daughter-in-law and my 2 grandchildren, who were 11 and 8 and growing so fast it startled me each time I saw them. My grandson ran in first and hugged me around the middle without slowing down, and for a moment I pressed my hand to the top of his head and thought that this, right here, was the whole reason for everything. We sat down to dinner, and it was fine. It was more than fine. My daughter-in-law complimented the biscuits, which surprised me, and my son had 2 helpings of the roast, which did not. The children talked about school and a video game I did not understand, and a teacher who had apparently said something funny last week that they still found worth repeating. I listened to all of it. I asked questions. I refilled glasses without being asked. It was after the apple cake that my son set his fork down carefully and looked at me with the particular expression he has worn since he was a teenager, delivering news he expected me to push back on. He said he had been thinking. He said he and my daughter-in-law had been talking for a while, actually, and they wanted to bring something up because they cared about me and they thought it was important. He said a lot of things first. the way people do when the thing they actually mean to say is waiting at the end of a long corridor of other words. What he meant to say was this. He thought I should add him to the deed of the house. He said it was just practical. He said it was about protecting the asset, about making sure there were no complications if something were to happen to me. He said the word asset the way people say it when they have been practicing. He mentioned estate planning. He mentioned probate, which he pronounced carefully, like a word he had recently learned. He said it would give him peace of mind, knowing the house was secure. My daughter-in-law nodded at appropriate intervals. The oak tree outside had gone dark in the window, just a shape now against the evening sky. I looked at my son across my mother-in-law's tablecloth, and I thought of the afternoon 31 years ago when my husband and I signed the papers for this house, how we sat at a stranger's desk and wrote our names side by side, and then walked outside into that spring afternoon and stood on the sidewalk, not saying anything, just standing there together with the knowledge that something had shifted permanently. I said I would think about it. My son smiled. My daughter-in-law smiled. My son said, great, that he just wanted what was best for me, that he hoped I knew that. I said I did. I said thank you for coming. I packed up the leftover cake for them to take home, and I stood in the doorway and watched their car pull away from the curb. Then I went inside and stood in my kitchen again in the quiet. I am 67 years old. I taught 6th grade English for 32 years before I retired. And one thing 32 years in a classroom teaches you is how to recognize when something is being explained to you that you have not asked to have explained. My son was not wrong that adding him to the deed would simplify things eventually. What he did not say, and what sat in the room between his words and mine all through dinner, was why now? Why this Saturday? Why the pot roast and the biscuits and the apple cake first? I slept on it, the way I sleep on everything that matters. In the morning, I called my oldest friend, a woman I have known since we were both young mothers pushing strollers around the same park, who has since become a real estate agent and knows more about property law than most people I have met. We had coffee on my porch, which is what we do when something needs to be thought through out loud rather than inside a single head. I told her what my son had said. I told her how he had said it. I told her about the word asset and the careful pronunciation of probate and the way my daughter-in-law had nodded. My friend held her coffee mug with both hands and looked at the oak tree for a moment and then looked at me. She said there was nothing wrong with adding someone to a deed. In principle, she said it was a legitimate form of estate planning. She also said that if a person were added to a deed as a joint tenant with right of survivorship, they would have an equal legal claim to the property, including the right to force a sale under certain circumstances. She said this was not common knowledge. She said people sometimes signed things without understanding exactly what they were signing. She asked me, gently, whether my son had mentioned anything lately about money, whether he had mentioned anything about the house specifically, its value, the neighborhood, what properties nearby had been selling for. I thought about that for a moment, and then I remembered, quietly, that he had, twice in the past year, casually, the way you mention something you want to seem like you are not thinking about. He had mentioned that old Henderson's place 2 streets over had sold for considerably more than anyone expected. He had mentioned that the market in this area was strong right now, which is a strange thing to mention to your mother when she is not trying to sell anything. I sat with that on my porch for a long time after my friend left. The morning was cool, and the oak tree was still holding most of its leaves, golden and full, the way it gets for a few weeks each fall before it lets everything go. My husband used to say that the oak was the most reliable thing in our yard because it was always exactly where it was supposed to be. I have lived in this house for 31 years. My children grew up in it. My husband came home to it every evening for 27 years and left it for the last time in an ambulance on a cold morning and never came back. I planted the garden in the side yard myself. I painted the hallway cream over my son's objections, and I have never once regretted it. There is a mark on the doorframe in the kitchen where we measured both children every year until they were too old to think it was fun anymore, and I have never painted over it because I cannot bring myself to, and I will not. This house is not an asset. It is everything that remains of the life my husband and I built together, and I will not sign it over to anyone, not even the boy I raised from nothing, not under any circumstances, not ever. The following week, my son called again. He said he had spoken to his financial advisor, which was new, and that the advisor agreed it was a smart move, adding him to the deed. He sent me a document by email with some language he had found online, which I opened and read carefully because 32 years of teaching English will not let me skim a document, and which was, as my friend had explained, a joint tenancy agreement that would give him an equal and immediate claim to the property. I thanked him for sending it. I said I was still reviewing my options. Over the following 2 months, the calls came more regularly. My daughter-in-law started texting me articles about senior living arrangements, gently worded pieces about the benefits of downsizing, the freedom of not maintaining a large property alone, the communities available to women my age. I read each one. I thanked her for thinking of me. I kept my voice warm and my thoughts my own. There was a Sunday in December when my son and his family came for the grandchildren's winter concert at the school nearby, and afterward they came to the house, and I overheard my son and my daughter-in-law in the hallway, speaking in the half-lowered voices people use when they believe an older woman in the next room is not following the conversation. My daughter-in-law said they needed to move soon if they were going to list in the spring. My son said he knew. My daughter-in-law said she had already called 2 agents. My son said he was working on it, that his mother was just being slow about it, that she would come around. I was standing in my kitchen with a dish towel in my hands when I heard that. I finished drying the glass I was holding. I folded the towel over the edge of the sink, the way I have folded it over the edge of every sink I have ever owned. I looked out the small window above the faucet at the oak tree in the backyard. Leafless now in December, just branches against a pale sky, patient and entirely certain of itself. Something finished inside me in that moment, or perhaps something started. I am not entirely sure which it was. I only know that the thing I had been waiting to feel arrived, and it was not grief and it was not anger. Though both of those had visited earlier in the season, it was clarity. The particular kind that comes when you finally see a thing exactly as it is and understand that you have been seeing it that way all along, underneath. I walked back into the living room with 2 cups of tea, and I smiled at my grandchildren, and I did not say a word about what I had heard. My son met my eyes for a moment across the room, and I held his gaze evenly and smiled at him too, because I have spent 67 years learning how to carry things in private, and I am very good at it. That week, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my own attorney, a woman I had used for various things over the years since my husband died, whose office is on the far side of town in a building with a good parking lot. I explained what I wanted. She explained what was possible. We scheduled an appointment for Thursday morning. The second call was to my financial advisor, who is not my son's financial advisor and whose name my son does not know, which I had always considered merely a matter of privacy and now considered something closer to providence. I asked her to review my accounts, my documents, my named beneficiaries. I asked her to make sure everything was in order and that everything was exactly where I intended it to be. The third call was to my friend, who answered on the second ring and listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I value most about her after all these years. Thursday morning, I drove to my attorney's office in the early light. The appointment took an hour and a half. When I left, I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes with my hands on the wheel, not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted to let the weight of the thing settle before I drove home. The documents were signed. The arrangements were made. Nothing could be added to the deed of my house without my sole written consent, which I was not prepared to give, and everything else was organized the way I had originally intended it to be organized before other people began having opinions about it. On the drive home, I thought about my mother's kitchen. I thought about my husband, signing the papers beside me in the spring. I thought about the children's heights marked on the doorframe that I will never paint over. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat for a moment and looked at the house from outside. The way you rarely look at a thing you see every day. It is not a grand house. It is a house that has been lived in, and you can tell. The paint on the front door has started to peel at the bottom edge. The garden, dormant now in December, does not look like much, but it will again in May. The oak tree in the back is invisible from the front, but I know it is there, exactly where it is supposed to be. I went inside. I put on the kettle. I sat at the kitchen table with my cup of tea, and I did not do anything remarkable. I did not call my son. I did not compose a speech. I did not write a letter or plan a confrontation or imagine the conversation that was eventually going to happen when he realized what I had done and what I was not going to do. I sat in my house and I drank my tea, and I looked at the mark on the kitchen doorframe, the pencil lines in a column from ankle height up. 2 names in my husband's handwriting, 1 line per year per child, the dates beside each mark in his small, careful print, the last one from the year he got sick. And we both forgot about the tradition, and then remembered in November and did it in the hallway instead of the kitchen, and laughed about it, because the marks were 1.5 inches off from where they should have been. My son called the following Saturday. He said he wanted to follow up about the deed. He said he had spoken to his advisor again, and he really thought we should move forward sooner rather than later given the market. He asked if I had had a chance to look at the document he had sent. I said yes. He asked what I thought. I said I had thought about it very carefully. I said I had spent a considerable amount of time thinking about it, actually, and that I appreciated him bringing it to me because it had led me to do something I had been meaning to do for a while, which was to review all of my affairs and make sure everything was in the kind of order that reflects what I actually want, rather than what other people think I want. There was a pause on the line. I told him, calmly and without cruelty, that I was not adding anyone to the deed of my house. I told him that the house would remain solely in my name for as long as I am alive and well, which I intend to be for some time. I told him that everything else was also in order, and that he was welcome to speak with my attorney if he had questions, and I gave him her name. He said he did not understand. I said I thought he did. I said it gently, because he is still my son, and some things do not change. But I said it clearly, because some things cannot be left unclear. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said he felt like I did not trust him. I thought about the hallway. My daughter-in-law's lowered voice. The word list. The call to 2 agents already. I said that trust is something built over time and tended carefully, and that I loved him and would always love him, but that this particular decision was mine to make, and I had made it. We said goodbye. It was not a warm goodbye, but it was honest, which I have come to value more than warmth when the two are in conflict. The days that followed were quiet. I have always been good with quiet. I made soup on Monday and biscuits on Wednesday just for myself, and I ate them at my own table with the radio on low and the oak tree visible through the dining room window. My grandchildren called on Thursday to tell me about a school project. Separately, in the eager, tumbling way children talk when they are excited about something, and I listened to every word and asked questions and laughed at the right places. My friend came for coffee again on Friday. We sat on the porch even though it was cold, wrapped in the good wool blankets I keep in the basket by the back door, and we talked about things that had nothing to do with deeds or assets or the spring real estate market. We talked about a book we had both read. We talked about her daughter's new job. We talked about the way the oak tree looks in January, all structure and patience, none of the decoration. She asked me how I was doing. I thought about the question honestly, which is the only way worth thinking about anything. I said I was well. I said I had been better in some ways years ago, when my husband was alive and the children were young and the house was full of the noise of a family in motion. But I said I was also, in some ways I could not have anticipated, more entirely myself than I had been in a long time. Perhaps ever. She nodded. She understood. She has known me long enough to understand most things without them needing to be elaborated. We drank our coffee and watched the yard. A cardinal landed in the oak tree for a moment, bright and brief, and then it was gone. There is a thing that happens when you have lived long enough and lost enough and made enough difficult decisions in enough quiet rooms. You stop waiting for someone else to tell you what your life is worth. You already know. It is not a dramatic knowledge, and it does not arrive all at once. It gathers the way things gather slowly, in the corners, over years, until one morning you stand in your kitchen and you realize it has been there long enough to be unmovable. My house stands exactly where it has always stood. The hallway is still cream. The kitchen doorframe still holds the record of 2 children growing. The oak tree in the backyard is bare in January, but entirely certain of what it is and where it belongs. And in April, it will prove itself right again the way it has every year for 31 years. I am 67 years old. I am not in any particular hurry. I am not afraid of the quiet, or the empty chairs, or the meals I eat alone at a table set for one. I have learned to cook for myself with the same care I always brought to cooking for others, because it turns out I was always worth that care, and no one was going to hand that understanding to me. I had to walk to the edge of giving everything away before I understood that I never had to give anything away at all. The spring came, as it does. The oak tree leafed out green and full by the end of April. The garden in the side yard came back better than I expected. The tulips I had planted in October without entirely believing in them came up in a long row of deep red, and I cut a few and put them in the center of my table, and I ate dinner alone in my dining room with the good dishes and my mother-in-law's tablecloth and the flowers in their place, and I thought about my husband, and I thought about my mother's kitchen, and I looked out at the tree going gold in the late light, and I was grateful, not for the things that had been taken, not for the lesson learned the hard way, grateful for what remained, for the house around me and the years behind me, and the quiet certainty that I was still, in every way that mattered, exactly where I was supposed to be.